Hi, Leah. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. So, Leah, I thought perhaps we could start by maybe sharing a little bit about yourself and perhaps what got you interested in the area of self-regulation and emotional control with children.
I was an occupational therapist, or I am, and working in the schools was where I was really seeing this need to support kids in self-regulation. There was so many kids that were on my caseload that I was working with to support their sensory regulation needs, and I was finding I would show up to a classroom and the teacher would literally push a kid out the door to me saying he needs to calm down, and I would bring him to my sensory motor room, get him to this just right level of arousal, and as I brought him back to class, the teacher may say, oh, we're 5 minutes into math, catch up to problem 6, and now the kid is exploding
Mm,
because he missed the first 5 minutes of math.
mm,
And the teacher's looking at me. Now what are you going to do? I'm looking at the teacher like, I'm not sure. And I just saw a lot of us looking at each other, unsure what to do. And what often resulted was a very punitive approach then
mm,
to that student where if he couldn't quickly comply with the demand, he was being escorted out or exploding or whatnot. And then there was punishment and consequences, and there wasn't any teaching in how to help the student have a more adaptive pro-social response to that stressor. So I was taking graduate work, and my bachelor's is in occupational therapy, and I was getting my master's in education and a graduate autism certificate. And so it was through the coursework and applying it to my caseload that I started thinking about how could we do this differently, and how can we go look beyond teaching a kid a lesson to truly teaching them a
mm,
lesson in self-regulation.
yeah. So, how do you explain self-regulation to teachers? Leah? I'm sure there are, you've got a whole program there that you do this with, but are there some metaphors and analogies that you find really cuts through to explain what it is?
Uh, well, it's really, a complex skill
Mm,
that covers it's umbrella skill that you think about self-discipline and self-control, anger management, emotional control, all falling under. But we have to regulate our level of arousal, and we also call this our level of alertness. And so this is uh, for example, some of us wake up to that alarm and we hit snooze immediately. And this is a
mm,
very low level of arousal. Some of us are startled by the alarm, and that's a
mm,
heightened level of arousal. And
mm,
some of us are laying in bed already thinking about our day, planning ahead. And that's this more grounded, organized level of arousal. And
mm,
so we need to adjust this as well as how we're revealing our emotions in a
mm,
way that's adaptive to the social context that we're in relation to the goals or the tasks that we're trying to achieve, the environment.
mm,
And so for many kids, those goals, those tasks are just getting through the work,
mm,
moving on in their schedule, having fun playing the game, pleasing their parents, their teachers, having friends to eat lunch with and play with. So
mm,
we make all these adjustments to how we're expressing those emotions that are innate inside
mm,
of us and managing that level of arousal in order to move more smoothly through our day.
mm.
Uh,
And that's so critical with learning, isn't it? To be able to do that. And it almost seems foundational to be able to do that, to be able to do any higher level cognitive kind of learning.
Right, it is. It's such a foundational skill, and you're not going to be in the place for learning and taking on that challenge of academics, turning that information into knowledge if you're not in this calm, regulated, grounded state. And
Mm,
so I see more and more schools understanding the value of this and wanting those high level achievement scores from their students, but putting the work in building the self-regulation skill set to give their students the success. And the research is really backing this up too. It's been exciting to see the pendulum swinging and more research coming out showing the value of self-regulation, not just in academics, but it's a lifelong skill that we're all addressing and working at. And
I was just curious to hear. I was thinking about the story you were saying about, those early days where you'd look at each other, and because I think lots of people can relate to that. Did you have a story in mind that really was a bit of a turning point for you, where you thought, oh, these sort of sensory regulation strategies are actually effective and they make quite a difference? Was there a particular anecdote or story that stood out in your mind, Leah?
Yeah, I had one student who was a really tough, he was a kindergarten student. He came from, unfortunately, a really dysfunctional home where he had a parent incarcerated. He had being raised by a single mother who he had another brother with a disability. We know there was drugs in the home, and he had impaired IQ level too, so the cognitive impairment. But working on really making this routine and helping him understand first his emotions as step one. And at one point, as we were working and using the zones of regulation framework with him, on his own will, he put his picture up into what we call the red zone when he's in this very heightened state of arousal and emotions are kind of at their max. And he put himself into a timeout. And that wasn't something we were teaching with the red zone, but for me, it was this aha moment where I saw a kid who, could barely go through the ABCs and spell his name, but he had enough insight to recognize, okay, I'm really irate right now. And what typically happens is I end up in timeout. And so he let us know he was in that, heightened state, and he put himself in timeout. And so we just wrote a different ending to this routine that he was now picking up on. And so to me, I saw that there's this little bit of control that we have when we're at this super heightened state, that we can help kids diverge from maybe their typical expression of those really heightened states. Maybe it's running, fleeing out of a building, or aggressing or destroying, or whatever that disruptive behavior may be that's protective in nature for the child. We can teach them a different alternative ending and recognizing I'm in that state, but I don't have to diverge this way. I can have a calm, quiet place where there's nothing punitive associated with it, and we can be learning strategies. And so by the end of the year, this kid would identify he was in the red zone and participate in yoga independently, just at his spot. And this was a kid who had been going into a timeout, which was out of the classroom and involved, behavior reports, and sometimes led to a locked seclusion situation. He was going there multiple times a day to going there maybe once a week, and if that even, and doing yoga. So that was a pivotal place where I thought, okay, this has something.
That's an incredible story. Thanks for sharing that. So I think that segues quite nicely to the program itself, the zones of regulation. Did you just want to perhaps introduce us to the program itself and what it looks like, Leah?
Sure. So the zones is a framework for thinking. It comes packaged up in a curriculum, and this is the book here.
Yeah.
But what we're teaching with this is a systematic approach to classifying all the different feelings and these states, these levels of arousal, our energy. So essentially what we're feeling on the inside, we're giving, assigning a zone to it. So there's 4 zones, and this is helping make some more abstract emotional world we live in more concrete and looking at it from a systematic approach. So once we're able to categorize and recognize what zone we're in, then we can identify tools that support regulating that zone. So there's 4 zones. Red is that very heightened level of arousal, those really intense, overwhelming emotions. Yellow is elevated emotions. They've intensified, but I still see that cognitive control to a greater degree in that yellow zone. So it might be worried. It could be silly. It can be wiggly or irritated, overwhelmed. And so positive and less comfortable emotions fall in the yellow as well as the red, because sometimes we're elated in the red zone. We're, going, if, our sports team won the state championship, that's this big exuberant emotional experience we may be experiencing. So I would put that in the red zone. And then the green zone is when we're in a more controlled, organized state. So we might be happy, calm, focused. And then the blue zone is these lower levels of arousal, these down feelings, sad, sick, tired, bored. And so with this systematic approach, it gives a very visual structure to this, as well as it helps ease communication. So when we're learning, in learning mode, we talk about our feeling and what zone it falls in. But then when we do get in those less regulated states, we could just simply point to the zone we're in. We could use just a color to identify it. And then there's allowing that co-regulation between a caregiver, a teacher, a parent, and the student to support them in finding the tools that can be helpful in regulating that zone.
And what seems to be nice about that is that it's a useful tool all the way from someone who has no difficulties at all to all the way to, someone with really challenging kind of behaviors, that it's sort of across the spectrum of kids, isn't it?
Yeah, we all, as I said before, work on regulation. There's not an adult out there, I don't think, who doesn't have some sort of reflection after they've been dysregulated before, thinking, well, that didn't work out so well for me. I need to work on this or that. We don't, there's, not this magic threshold of we all stay 100% regulated, 5 out of 5 trials across 4 environments with no prompts. Because the reality is we get stressed and overwhelmed as adults, we get angered, we get worried, and we don't always manage those emotions as well as we want to. So it's a life skill, and this is something that certainly I, initially designed for my kids who had special needs, who had neurobiological impairments. But I think the reach is far beyond those, because like you said, all kids are learning this and all adults are still using this. So I find a lot of adults who are familiar with the framework, they talk in the colors of the zones to their colleagues, and they'll say, I'm in the yellow right now, or, I was getting close to the red zone, and it's just this simple language. It's a way to co-regulate with each other.
No, that's great. And so what would be some of the key strategies, Leah, do you think, from the program?
Well, the program works a lot at helping students build awareness in a very just user-friendly way. There's the 4 colors, and I find a lot of kids just really, it makes it simple for them and easier to grasp. And I find with teachers, therapists, parents, it feels approachable for them as well. So I find that the colors and the language around it makes it tangible for people to be implementing and using and kind of adopting in their cognitive thinking. And so the first chapter where the lessons are found, there's 3 chapters that comprise of 18 lessons total. It's working a lot at just gaining that awareness of how am I feeling on the inside, because we're not going to be able to use a tool to regulate ourselves if we don't first have that awareness that we're in a less regulated spot. So there's a lot going into building that awareness of self and being able to recognize triggers that dysregulate me or move me into a different zone. I think another positive of this, though, is that this is intended to be used with no judgment. And so there's no shaming, there's no penalties associated with one zone or another. It's not this behavioral approach where you get points if you stay in this zone or lose points in that zone. It's really meant to be used to help kids understand that all these emotions are human nature, and that we're going to experience these different emotions, therefore we experience all these different zones. And it's just our job to work on recognizing what zone or feelings we have, and do I need to manage it when I'm given the situation I'm in, the context that is playing out around me.
Yeah, it's a simple framework, but really powerful in that social emotional learning, isn't it? That sort of self-awareness for the kids, but also for the professionals and the teachers as well, from the sounds of it. What is your experience of the sort of major barriers for teachers or educators or schools adopting frameworks like this, Leah? What's been your experience?
I find often for teachers, they have so much on their plate, and they have so much pressure to have those high-performing test scores from their students that it can feel like, oh gosh, this is one more thing now that I got to be doing. And I really think that this is something that it can be, you set aside a little time up front to teach the zones, but then it's something that it can be just embedded into the conversations in the classroom, that dialogue. You can overlay this into your academic instructions. Say you're doing written expression, you could take a topic on the zones and have them do written expression around that. There is, read aloud, and you can talk about the characters and what zone they may fall in and what tools would help them. But with this, then I find you have this visual structure now in your classroom, and I find for a lot of teachers who are stressed about, they have this classroom management as their job, but a lot of teachers tell me, we don't get a lot of instruction on how do we do classroom management. And what the zones has offered to them is a way to build student self-management and move that burden away from that teacher's shoulders and help the students build responsibility in their self-management in a way that is, again, not feeling punitive and shame-based, but it does take, some time up front to put the framework in place in the classroom and putting some visuals up. But once you have that, there is, and I find another thing is allowing routine time to practice tools. But if you just carve 5 minutes out of your daily schedule, maybe as kids transition in from recess, that it happens then. And then on the back end, you're not hopefully going to be spending so much time managing student conflicts, prompting kids to be paying attention, and they can be using the zones framework to support kids in doing more of that self-regulation versus that teacher-imposed regulation.
So many good points there. Yeah, I was talking to a teacher recently who uses the framework in her classroom, and one of the things she was telling me about was how it felt like she had a framework now of when to use strategies rather than just picking up a whole heap of things and kind of trying different things out to see what sticks, that it feels like she had a bit of a structure. Is that the sort of feedback you often get about the program, Leah?
Yeah, I think teachers find it really approachable, and that it also lends itself to be used in conjunction with what the teacher is comfortable with. If they've been using another framework, a curriculum, some strategies, some calming techniques, none of that is replaced with the zones. The zones framework can be overlaid and embedded into that language. Those visuals often, I find, work in conjunction with what they may already be comfortable with. And now we're just enhancing it with that zones piece too. But I don't find it's an either or we're just doing the zones. That it works really well when woven with what the teacher's comfort is, and what the students' familiarity is with, that it can just be used with that, not to replace that.
So I wanted to get your thoughts about a common dilemma that you probably have encountered as well, where teachers feel really stuck with treating certain students unfairly. The kids who've got difficulties coming on, that they get all these, it feels like they get all these extra supports and allowed time away and things like that, and some teachers find that hard to manage in terms of keeping things fair with the other kids. How does that work in the program? What were your thoughts about that, Leah?
Well, what the program really tries to support kids doing is finding, what is their tools that are individualized to them.
Right.
What are they empowered to use to regulate? And so there is, within the framework, a huge opportunity for individualization by the student, because what we want the students to be, is empowered to use those tools. I was finding myself saying, you need to go take a break, you need to calm down, because that's what I saw as what that student needed. But that only worked about half the time, because the kid's like, I don't feel that I need that. So instead, I really want the kids to build that awareness of what they need and what works for them. And so with that said, yes, some kids' tools may be a little more, I guess,
left to stand up.
They might need more support. They might need more time with their tool. They might need more equipment. But what I also find is that the tools that we initially find that work with the students, we can still be stretching those students to be working towards finding more adaptive tools that are less disruptive to the classroom. So if we say, taking a break and a calming corner is a tool, well, this is a whole lot less disruptive than, lashing out on another student or destroying property in a school environment. So it's a step in the right direction, but we also want kids, in their desk learning. And so that we might be able to inch that kid over time to get to the place where now down the road he can just put his head down in that situation to regulate that zone. But to go from that jump of, well, I'm ripping up a classroom to putting my head down is too big of a leap. So we
Mm.
gotta work towards that. So I think that is encouraging for some teachers to see, like, well, when we like weigh our options here,
Mm.
taking a break in a calming space is a much better option than this. But we want to support them in finding other strategies and helping them be more adaptive, more subtle in
Mm.
as they
Mm.
go along.
Yeah.
Did that answer your question? I
Yes,
might have
yes, it
veered a
does.
little off topic.
No, absolutely. I think Kay and I have been talking a lot about having inclusive classrooms, about giving kids what they need, and that's exactly what you're referencing there, I think, is for them to have some thought about it for themselves, but for teachers to have that kind of individualized response to the kids as well.
Yeah. Part of what we're teaching with the zones is with that green zone,
Mm.
this is when we're in that calm, regulated state. But we also have tools to support our green zone.
Mm.
So I see these as our proactive strategies.
Mm.
Rather than waiting until we're dysregulated in maybe the yellow or the red or the blue, what can we be doing to support that student in his or her green zone to keep them in a more regulated space rather than wait till they're dysregulated and now they're missing out on academics because they're engaged in tools. Can we find some green zone tools to support them maybe in their chairs so that they can be engaged in the learning and supporting what they need to stay regulated?
Mm. Mm.
And so there's that proactive approach to this too. It's not all just reactive.
Yeah. And I think that piece you were talking about pre-teaching and practicing things is such an important part of that too, isn't it? That they can do these things in the green zone and keep themselves there. I know Kai often says, strike when the iron's cold.
Right, yeah, for sure. I think that was something I was working in the schools. We were all really reactive.
Mm.
We were we would spend time thinking about, what can we adapt, what can we modify to be proactive, but we
Mm.
weren't thinking about what can we teach the kid necessarily
Mm.
so that
Mm.
he or she can also be proactive.
Mm.
Because ultimately, as this kid ages up, they're at the helm, and in the real world, we're not adapting and modifying, for our neighbor next door to us or
Mm.
the coworker that sits next to us. It's up to us as adults to be at the helm of self-management. And so I think that's really important that the student gain that skill set. And it's not just us kind of in the background, trying to be the puppet master
Mm.
and,
That's right.
have everything just lined up just so that we can keep them in that regulated state. I think that's important. Don't get me wrong. For many kids, they need the adapting and the modifying, but that skill building is so important too. And that was a big goal of mine to address that student skill building.
Yeah, no, that's great. So, Leah, what were your thoughts about or tips that you might have about kind of collecting data or checking to see if, interventions are being effective or not? Did you have any thoughts about that?
Sure. I have some on my website. There's some documents that I've adapted that others have shared with me that I've used as pre-post. There's a self-regulation checklist that is
Sorry,
helpful.
Leah. Did you just want to tell us
Oh,
the website?
oh,
Just the website?
sorry.
Yeah,
Zonesofregulation.com.
great. Thank you.
Just the title of the book.com. And so that's just an informal assessment, but you can be having a parent fill that out pre-post. There's a student self-assessment that they can be looking at. But then in the book itself, there is a lot of opportunities for the students to be compiling data. As they're self-monitoring themselves, you can be keeping that and looking at that over the course of time and seeing, does their day become more regulated? Have they increased their repertoire of tools? Are they using their tools with more frequency? And so there's a lot of that data keeping even embedded into the lessons themselves. Because what I find with self-regulation is it is a hard skill to measure. And I've found research to say that there isn't even an all-encompassing self-regulation tool out there. Often we're measuring sub-skills of this, looking at executive functioning and sensory processing and modulation and social cognition. And we can measure with the standardized tool deficits in those areas and look at how they retest over the course of time in that. But it's hard to, when you're observing self-regulation, to necessarily see what that kid is thinking, what's going on inside. So I do find that it's really valuable to have the students self-monitoring and self-reporting when possible. And I find they're often probably harder on themselves than I am. And so that honesty is often there with many of our kids. So I think that's a piece of it. I think there's more that's something I'm continuing trying to figure out what to do better too, though.
That's really interesting, Leah, and it probably fits in with the philosophy of the program that you measure the skills rather than just behavior data in terms of, how problematic their behavior is, because essentially that's the focus of the program, isn't it, around skill building, and but clearly that's quite a complex thing to measure, I think. I was curious, you just briefly mentioned there about giving measures to parents. Have you had any experience of sharing this, from a school context and involving parents in that process at all? Or is that...
Yeah, definitely. I think it's important that kids don't go home just talking about colors and parents have no insight on, what do you mean you're in the red? So I find it's really important. I make it as easy as I can in the book. There's reproducibles that you can print off. There's a page explaining what it is. There's a one-page visual that can be sent home for parents to have, on the refrigerator. There's a glossary that can be sent home. But I really encourage people to have a parent training night where they welcome parents in and give some information on this. I've developed 2 apps on this. The one's called the Zones of Regulation and the other's called Exploring Emotions. And that's a real affordable way to have parents get more information on this. If they're walking with their student through the app, they're going to learn what the framework is too. And I find the apps are a nice way to bridge that divide between school and home and help parents feel like they're understanding what it is the school is addressing. So that's a resource. Then as kids are working through the curriculum too, just making sure we're sending home the work that they're putting together so that it can continue to be compiled and extended at home. I think visual supports are really important though in the home too. So
yeah. And lastly, I was just curious, I found sometimes with these sort of things that you put things in place and often there are 1 or 2 children who take just that little bit longer to get on to the system or, grasp it or come on board with things, or perhaps are a little more explosive than other kids. What would be your sort of general advice to teachers who have students like that where they don't see that success right away? What would be some of your thoughts?
I say this is unique to each student. it allows for individualization, and
Mm,
kids' progress needs to be measured against themselves and not
mm,
against their peers.
mm,
Self-regulation is a developmental skill, just
mm.
like learning to walk and learning to talk.
Yeah, that's great.
So we need to be mindful that our students, there's 18 lessons, and say we do those lessons over, 26 weeks or something. In 26 weeks, that's just a snapshot of their life. And many of our kids are not going to developmentally make that jump from, they may be 10, 15 years old, but developmentally their self-regulation skills may be that of a 4-year-old. And
Mm,
so they're not going to make that leap
mm,
in, half a year's time.
mm,
Just And so I think rather than have that mindset that, each week we're doing a new lesson or something like that, that we really are just looking at that student and saying, where are they at? Do they need more time with us? Are they demonstrating that knowledge? Because a lot of our kids can spout that knowledge,
mm,
and they can talk about, um, the zones upside down and backwards. But really, the zones is only our method to teach
mm,
self-regulation. And if they're not demonstrating those skills that we're trying to teach with this, to layer another one on,
mm,
I find we often are moving too fast, and that student may become resistant.
mm,
So really, I encourage people to slow down and pace the instruction based on where the student's skills are,
mm,
what are they absorbing and starting to demonstrate, what do we see emerging, and that can be giving us the clues of, okay, I think they're ready to, add some more to this and extend it another step. So it's not, I think it's really important to say that this takes time. There is a lot of effort and teaching needing to be placed up front
mm,
when the students are calm and regulated, in order to have those payoffs
mm.
down the road for when they become dysregulated, that now they're going to have some of that self-management. But that takes a front end approach. And so I really caution people to think that, you introduce this and you're going to see the payouts immediately.
Yeah.
It really takes time and practice and repetition, and a lot of students need that more intense support to,
Mm.
in a slow and steady kind of
Yeah.
approach.
And unfortunately, it sort of flies in the face of the general trend around standardizing everything, isn't it? Where we expect similar sort of outcomes across the board, when in fact it's absolutely true what you're saying. It's about meeting the child at their developmental level and helping them over time with that. Thank you so much, Leah. I was just wondering, with all your work, is there things that you're still curious about in your work that you'd like to learn more about?
Oh, always.
Yeah.
My head is constantly spinning. Excited about new things I read and ideas that come to the head. I'm working on a couple projects right now. We're going to be releasing a game, a board game, and so I think that'll be helping take this framework and allowing kids to engage in it in a really friendly way, playful way.
Mm.
So I'm excited about that. And yeah, my head goes a million directions. And just thinking about, uh, the whole school implementation is a big topic. A lot of schools are putting this in place school-wide, so I would love to try to work on more tools to help make that, more accessible for districts. The reality is, though, it takes time, and
Mm.
I'm a mom. I got young kids myself, and I got my hands in a lot of things, so I'm trying to keep myself grounded as well and take it one step at a time. So.
That's great. Thank you so much for taking the time out to speak to us,
Yeah.
Leah. Was there any final kind of information you wanted to share, or any resources or websites that you wanted to direct people to?
Sure, you can find a lot at my website, www.zonesofregulation.com, and that will link you to my publisher's website, to socialthinking.com, where the Zones book and posters are available for purchase. The apps can be found on your app store. In Android, Google Play, Amazon, whatnot. So there's that, and yeah, I think I just really thank you for this opportunity, and really hope that whether it's the Zones or any other approach out there, I just really am excited that there's more conversations being had like this to support students in self-regulation, and support teachers, parents, professionals in raising awareness of what might be underlying this, challenging behavior that we're faced with, and bringing about some understanding to these students, and skills to help address it. So.
That's great. Thank you so much, Leah. I hope we get another chance to speak with you again. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, and have a lovely evening,
Yeah.
I guess, over there. So take
Sounds
care.
good. Thank you.
Bye-bye.